Hello, and welcome to today's lecture on Marius and Sulla, Destructive Rivalries. I'm your professor, Dr. Rob Steffen, and today we are going to look at what happens when sparks of violence erupt into full-blown civil war. So, we're going to start by setting the scene, figuring out how we got here. From there, we're going to see some of the social changes in the late Roman Republic, especially when it comes to this division between optimates and populares. Then we'll look at the life of Gaius Marius, and then his opponent, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. And then we'll wrap it up with a few concluding thoughts. So, how did we get to this point of civil war? Well, it all begins before the city of Rome was even founded, way back in the early Iron Age, where for about 200 years, we have different tribes all over the Italian peninsula, the strongest and most complex of which were the Etruscans, just to the north and west of Rome. Now, Rome was founded in 753 BC by Romulus, and for 250 years, a series of 7 kings ruled as monarchs, all right? And while they started out fairly good with Romulus and Numa Pompilius, they ended not so good with Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. And so, in 509 BC, Lucius Junius Brutus ends up kicking out Tarquin the Proud and instituting the Roman Republic, where the ideology is there is no single ruler, and at consul, the highest position, there always must be 2 people ruling at any given time. And for 250 years, Rome slowly expands across the Italian peninsula. And then starting with their wars against Carthage, Rome, over the course of 130 years, from 264 to 133, is able to take over most of the Mediterranean. So we see them there in 264, and now in 133, they've got Spain, they've got Gaul this side of the Alps, the Italian peninsula, Corsica, Sicily, Sardinia, most of modern-day Croatia, Macedonia, Greece, northwestern Turkey, the western coast of Turkey, and Africa, all in the course of a century and a half. Now, that type of expansion, of course, leads to some pretty important social changes. And what we see is that in the earliest days of the Republic, we had this kind of struggle for power between the patricians, the fathers of Rome who were there at the beginning, and the plebeians, right? The regular people. And as that went on, the plebeians were able to get most of what they wanted, and so we don't see that division so much anymore. Instead, what we end up seeing is we see this kind of division between the optimates, the best people or the richest people, and the populares, the regular people of Rome, all right? And so what's happened is the patrician-plebeian divide isn't that important, but the struggle is essentially the same, right? It's still the kind of rich versus the poor, and you can see that Roman society at this point in time is now kind of divided more than it ever was. We've got slaves, freed slaves, laborers, merchants, soldiers, artisans, aristocrats, magistrates, the equestrians, who are the very, very, very kind of wealthy aristocrats, and the senators at the very top. So let's talk a little bit about what this division is between the optimates and the populares, right? When you think about these, you can kind of think about them like political strategies. And what the populares do is they follow the Gracchi's example of using the popular votes, the people's votes, without senatorial approval. What they're going to do is they're going to propose things that the people like. Land redistribution, grain subsidies, lower taxes, new infrastructure that they can use. And then they're going to rely on those people's votes to get them what they want, right? Kind of prestige within Rome. The optimates, on the other hand, they rely on these traditional political tools. Things like kind of oligarchic familial relationships, right? Personal alliances with their buddies, kind of the senatorial tight-knit group, and then the marshaling of personal clients, people reliant on them and their money to get things done. So when you think of the populares and the optimates, right, it's not necessarily like the Democrats and Republicans. It's not quite like they believe one thing or the other thing. It's more like these are a series of tactics to get things done, right? So when you think of this divide, think political tactics, playing to the people or playing to the Senate and their kind of friends. So let's take a look at our next character, Gaius Marius, the people's general. So we're about 10 to 15 years after Gaius Gracchus at this point in time. So at the very end of the 2nd century BCE. And we are going to move down towards Africa, and we're going to look at a character named Jugurtha, right? So the Jugurtha is the grandson of Massinissa, and he's Rome's old ally that Carthage started messing with that got Carthage into the Third Punic War. Now his grandson Jugurtha starts out as Rome's ally, but then turns out to do some things very anti-Roman. He takes over a neighboring town, and then he takes a bunch of Romans hostage. And this again kind of excites the Roman aristocracy because now they've got a new foreign enemy and they can go try to win that prestige and territory by going to conquer him. And it's Gaius Marius who's able to take control in the kind of campaign against Jugurtha. And he does through in a kind of tricky way. He actually gets the previous general, right? The guy he was working for, right? He was in this general's army. He gets him kicked out. He writes a bunch of letters saying, man, this general's really lousy, right? We got to get rid of him or we're never going to win this war. And so he gets this previous general kicked out. He's able to get the command. And what we see is he's portrayed very similar to almost like Hannibal. He's portrayed as the people's general, right? He eats with his soldiers. He sleeps on the ground with his soldiers. He's always the first out in warfare. He's very much kind of one with the people. And his background is not so much in this senatorial class as it is the equestrian class. And this is kind of a good point to say that when we're talking about all of these people, even though we have this populares optimates divide, we're all still up in the very, very top rung of things, right? Even people like Marius, who are known as kind of one of the big populares leaders, he's still like not quite senatorial, but he's very, very high up there. And his family has been that way as well. So Gaius Marius is eventually able to move up this ladder and get himself elected consul in 106 BC. And he's what we call a novus homo. And what this means, very literally, is a new man. And what that means is that Gaius Marius is the first person in his family to make it all the way to the consulship. Many times the consuls are people who their dad has been consul and their grandfather's been consul and all that thing. Gaius Marius is the first person in his family to make it all the way to the top. And as consul, right, leading the army way out here, Gaius Marius' big kind of contribution is a series of military reforms. So after Gaius Gracchus, a bunch of Gaius Gracchus' reforms get ditched, right, where you don't have to have your own armor and stuff like that. That legislation gets tossed out. And what Marius does is start to reinstitute some of it. So the first thing he says is, it's fine if you don't have land. You don't need land to be in the army. Also, we'll pay you to be in the army. We're going to make this a professional army. You don't have to have your own armor and weapons. We'll provide those for you. And then afterwards, when you retire, we're going to give you a plot of land. And if you're an ally who's joined the army, not only will we give you some land, we'll also give you Roman citizenship. And so he's really, really changing the shape of the army from this kind of citizen militia, where almost like Cincinnatus, right? You leave your farm, you go fight for a few months, and then you go back home, to this now professional army where you sign up and you serve for 20 or 25 years, and then afterwards you retire. And when you think about where things are, this is actually really important, okay? You'll notice Rome has gone from just dealing in the Italian peninsula to all of a sudden dealing with things all over the Mediterranean. And it doesn't make sense now to send an army out all the way from Rome to Asia, right, the west coast of Turkey, to fight for 3 months and then get on a boat and go back home. You need people to go across the Mediterranean, fight multi-year battles. And to do that, you have to have a professional army. And Marius is the guy who kind of makes these changes for Rome. One of the other changes is he now has his soldiers carrying everything they need. They're basically self-sufficient, right? They carry their pots and their pans and the little food, all that stuff. And they get this kind of nickname, Marius's mules, because they have to carry so much of their equipment. And Marius is able to use this new army to go down to Africa and defeat Jugurtha. But the way this actually plays out is a little bit weird. It's actually one of his lieutenants, a guy by the name of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who's able to swing one of Jugurtha's kind of closest allies, this Mauritanian guy, Mauritanian leader by the name of Bocchus. And he's able to sway him over to the Roman side, get him to betray Jugurtha. And we'll see later on that Sulla actually ends up kind of taking credit for this victory against Jugurtha. At the beginning, that doesn't really affect Marius at all. Marius, after these kind of this victory here, he's really high status in Rome. He's loving life. People are loving him. Things are good. And so he's got to set his eyes to the next thing. And what he does is he starts to look northward, right, towards Germany and towards these kind of Celtic groups in the far north of Italy. Now, the Romans had been getting their butt kicked for a couple years by the Germans. So in 109, 106, and then the big one in 105 at the Battle of Arausio in modern-day France. It's actually, if you translate it, it's the Battle of Orange in 105. And something there like 80,000 Romans are killed, right? The scale is staggering. And so Rome is not doing well against these Celtic tribes. So they send Marius up there, fresh off of his victory against Jugurtha. And in 101 BC, he's able to defeat the Cimbri and the Teutones, two of the big Celtic tribes up there that had been bothering Rome for years. So Marius has another kind of epic victory. He's celebrating triumphs in the city of Rome, and things are going really, really well. And what this is able to do is he's able to take that one consulship, and he's able to get elected time after time after time, and a fifth time, and a sixth time, and eventually a seventh time in the city of Rome. So on the one hand, this kind of makes sense. Man, we've got a great military leader, right? Let's keep electing him and keep letting him win these wonderful military victories. On the other hand, you might be able to see how this is problematic. Remember the prevailing ideology of the Roman Republic, right? No single person should rule, right? The power is always shared and it's always short term, so we can't get into these positions where people can be so corrupt. And yet we have this guy Marius here being elected consul 7 times in his life, and at least 5 of them are back to back to back to back to back. So this is potentially going to kind of lead to some problems of these kind of ultra powerful individuals. Now, Marius's problem is that eventually he runs out of people to fight, right? There's no one left to fight. He's defeated Jugurtha, he's defeated the Cimbri, he's defeated the Teutones, and now he has to actually go rule and try to find land for all these people that fought for him. And the Senate, right? Marius has always been one of the populares kind of leaders. The Senate is giving him a really hard time getting that land. Now, he's about to team up with these 2 tribunes, all right? So one guy by the name of Saturninus and another guy by the name of Glaucia. And they're starting to get crazy in terms of their kind of popularis take on things. So they start proposing all this kind of new legislation, right? They want to give Marius his land for his veterans, but they also start kind of doing other things, right? They do the subsidized grain thing again. They propose this oath that senators have to take to like do what's best for the republic. And they don't define what that is at all, right? But it gives them power to like persecute senators. And eventually, like in these races, like they start killing their opponents. And so it's kind of like if you took the Gracchi and then really set them on steroids, right? And they just kind of take this popularis thing to the new level. Now, Marius is in a difficult position, right? He's been elected to the Senate 6 times at this point, and he's been in the Senate for a long time, right? He's been elected consul 6 times, and his fellow senators are like, you need to condemn these guys. These guys are crazy. And at the same time, it's those guys who want to give Marius the land that he needs for his veterans. And so in the end, he's hated by the Senate for not condemning him, and he's hated by the people for not supporting those people that like want to support him. And so he kind of goes into this, well, not a very good place. And that's when we see the rise of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and the Optimates take control. So Lucius Cornelius Sulla, he's one of the Optimate leaders, all right? And he's born into one of these very old patrician families, right? So whereas Marius was a novus homo, the first to be consul, Sulla is in this old patrician family. And he ends up working his way up the ladder and eventually makes it to consul as well. And why he does this is he ends up promoting his career at the expense of Marius. So he starts bringing up like, hey, remember that victory over Jugurtha? It was actually me who ended up brokering that deal with Bocchus to be able to turn Jugurtha over. He's also able to win glory and prestige in what we call the social wars. So Rome's gotten themselves embroiled in a series of battles with their allies. That's why we call it the social wars. The Latin word socii means allies. And so he's able to win glory in those kind of battles and eventually making his way, again, all the way up to the consulship. Now, in the consulship, Sulla and Marius end up competing for who basically gets to head east to try to fight Mithridates VI of Pontus. So here we have Mithridates VI of Pontus. You can see Pontus up here. So it's in like the far eastern part of modern day Turkey. It's east of the actual Roman province of Asia. Now Mithridates has been starting to unite kind of some of the groups in that area. And in 88 BC, we get something known as the Vespers. And this was a coordinated attack set up by Mithridates, where he ends up getting the kind of local native groups in these areas to, on the same day, in many, many different cities, basically revolt against Rome and kill all the Romans. And again, something like tens of thousands, something like 80,000 Romans end up getting killed in the Vespers of 88. So something needs to be done, and Sulla and Marius see this as a very prestigious position and a prestigious command against Mithridates. So Marius and Sulla are going to fight for the right to go out east and fight against Mithridates. Sulla is kind of in the lead for this, right? So it's assumed that he'll end up getting the command. Marius has been out of the public spotlight for a while. But what ends up happening is one of the tribunes, right, one of the populares, proposes that Marius gets the command. And when this happens, something kind of monumental happens. Sulla takes his own army from the kind of social wars. He still has people loyal to him. He takes his army and he marches on the city of Rome. And this is in 88 BC, and this is a monumental thing because this is the first time in history where Rome, right, a Roman general, has taken a Roman army and marched that army on the city of Rome. He's using a Roman army to fight other Romans. Now, Marius' response to this is to get out of Dodge. He flees. He basically gets on a boat and goes out to North Africa. And Sulla is able to take the city of Rome. And once he does, he starts putting a list together, a short list this time, of a few of his kind of political enemies that he doesn't like so much. All right, so what Sulla ends up doing once he makes it into Rome with his army is he starts putting forth all this legislation that goes against the populares. So now all of a sudden you can't take legislation straight to the people. You have to take legislation to the Senate. And so this is going to, of course, put those senators in a kind of much stronger position than they were previously. He also prioritizes kind of the wealthiest, and he declares Marius an enemy of the state, just like Gaius Gracchus had been declared an enemy of the state. And again, what that means is that people are bound to do him harm. He can be killed on the spot. So with this in place, Sulla sets out for his campaign against Mithridates. So he takes his army east, and this again is the most prestigious command in the Roman world at this period of time. And this is kind of ironic, right? Because it's actually Sulla who's gotten really, really powerful. But the reason he got really, really powerful is because a lot of the reforms that Marius made. And those kind of military reforms, one of the big implications is that it makes the army much more loyal to the general, because the general's got to win enough to be able to provide them with all those things: money and food, land for retirement. All of a sudden, those armies become very, very reliant on the general. So in 87 BC, after Sulla has set out for the east, the populares in Rome recall Marius. And this time, he comes with his army. So now for the second time in 2 years, a Roman general has taken a Roman army to march on the city of Rome, right? Roman versus Roman here. And what he does when he gets there is he starts killing some of his political opponents using that army. He does weird things. He mutilates their corpses. He starts confiscating their land, really using the Roman army for his own political purposes. Now, we never get the big kind of throwdown between Marius and Sulla because Marius dies a couple days into his 7th consulship, a record 7th consulship, but he dies kind of naturally a few days later. Now, later on, he becomes a big rallying point for the populares movement. And he's known as this kind of very great conqueror. But one of the things is that outside of those military reforms, he doesn't do much in terms of actually ruling Rome, in terms of actually fixing the problems that Rome actually has. He's a much better conqueror than he is a ruler. So Sulla returns from the east, all right? And he's able to win a couple battles against Mithridates, but not kind of enough to totally kill him, okay? So he's able to do enough where he can kind of claim victory, but not so much that he actually encompasses, takes all the land. So Sulla comes back and he makes it to the walls of Rome. This time he's got his army. So this is the third time now that a Roman army has marched on the city of Rome. And this time the Marian supporters are there to meet him. Marius is dead, but his supporters meet him at the Colline Gate. And it's a mix between supporters of Marius and the Samnites, and they end up fighting Sulla right outside the gates of Rome. Now it's an incredibly bloody and kind of gruesome battle. And at the end, 50,000 Romans are dead. And think about this. This is a legitimate civil war between Romans and other Romans. In the end, Sulla is able to win and take over the city. Now what he does when he takes over the city is he takes what Marius was doing earlier in terms of kind of trying to prosecute or persecute his enemies, and he does this to the next level. So we have a thing called Sullas Prescriptions, and this is basically a series of names that he posts of enemies of Rome. And of course they're enemies of Rome in his own opinion. So these aren't foreign enemies, these are Romans, right? But Romans who were supporters of Marius, Romans who are kind of anti-Sulla, right? Anybody Sulla doesn't like, he puts on that list. And so there's something like 1,500 names on that list. And something over 9,000 people die as a result of these prescriptions. And you can imagine how chaotic this is in the city of Rome. Imagine a scenario where like, hey, you want your neighbor's land? And you just go tell somebody, oh yeah, I heard him. He was talking pretty good about Marius. Maybe we should get his name on that list. And then his name goes on the list. He ends up getting killed or exiled. And then all of a sudden you get your neighbor's land. And so these prescriptions end up being used not just for actual enemies of Rome, but for political purposes and for confiscation of land and for economic gain. Then Sulla declares himself dictator for life, right? He sees Rome as kind of in chaos. And remember, what a dictator is the kind of temporary rule of a single person. We saw Cincinnatus as dictator 400 years ago, all right? And what he was known for was leading Rome to victory and then immediately abandoning that position of dictatorship. Well, now Sulla has said that he is going to be dictator forever. But what ends up happening is kind of weird. So he's dictator for a while, and then a couple years in, he retires. This is something very strange, right? So I think people would not have expected it, but he goes ahead and he retires and he moves down to southern Italy and lives out the rest of his life down there. And on his epitaph, the kind of last words of Sulla here is that no friend has ever served me and no enemy ever wronged me whom I have not repaid in full, right? Saying that he took care of his friends and he took care of his enemies. I think those words kind of very much encapsulate the harshness kind of and the power of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. So a few concluding thoughts here. We see in Marius and Sulla the escalation of this kind of conflict between the populares, represented by Marius, and the optimates, represented by Sulla. We see this kind of erupt into actual civil war, where 3 different times we get both sides, right, marching Roman armies, led by a Roman, on the city of Rome. We can also see in both of them the increasing power of individuals. And so one of the big implications of Marius's reforms are that this makes the soldiers more reliant on their general than they had ever been before, right? They're reliant on their general for money, for their pay, for their kind of retirement benefits, to find them land afterwards. And so they become incredibly reliant on these generals. And that's a problem. When all of a sudden the soldiers are more loyal to the generals than they are to the city of Rome, those generals have incredible amounts of power. And what that kind of leads to in this scenario is all-out civil war. And this is the first of 3 different kind of major civil war conflicts that we're going to see over the course of the next 100 years. And it's all precipitated in that conflict between Marius and Sulla.